Mandy, Muscato, it's good to have you. It's nice to see you.
It's great to be here.
Last I saw you was in Pork Fest, and we talked about this idea of having a hangout on sign language. My idea was that sign language represents something like a market creation, something that wasn't created by governments, but rather by free people to address a big need in the world. You were excited about the idea of doing a hangout.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll notice I'm going to speak a little bit slower than usual here because we're lucky enough to have myself and a sign language interpreter here today, my colleague Michelle Santarpia, and also we have Matthew Osborne who's going to co-present and help out today. So I'm going to be speaking just a little bit slower than usual so that there is equal access for everyone. And yeah, so I just have
You have some ideas you want to share?
Say that part again?
You have some ideas you'd like to share with some of the history?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
I have a little bit of a background. So first I want to say there's some helpful vocabulary that'll help us with my background too. So a person that can hear is called a hearing person. So they will be referred to as hearing in the deaf community, and a person who is deaf or a person who cannot hear prefers the term deaf. Some people are surprised by this, but deaf is a perfectly fine way to address the person who can't hear. And another term that I'm going to mention is autism, A-U-D-I-S-M, not autism, but autism. And I also want to say and stress that the things that I'm saying, it's all information that I acquired from research, and my opinions do not reflect the entire deaf community, but they're research from some deaf individuals and myself. So I'd like to start with, so I'd like to start talking about how sign language came to be. And I'd like to give a little historical background first, which is actually international background. Since sign language, although we call it American Sign Language, we owe a lot of gratitude to the French. The first deaf person to publish a book was in the late 1700s. His name was Desloges, D-E-S-L-O-G-E-S. This man influenced another man named Michael Epe, who felt that deaf people should have equal access to education, and he also felt that after reading this publication that he would be able to contribute in some way to establishing a school for the deaf. So that's what he did. And that happened in 1755. So Charles Epe is highly regarded and respected as the first pioneer for public education for the deaf, even though he is the person who is hearing. So after that happened, a group of deaf students started to become his mentees, and one of those individuals is Laurent Clerc in French, Claire. He's most noteworthy because our Thomas Gallaudet, who we know in America, collaborated with Laurent Clerc, and together they formed a school for the deaf in Connecticut, which was the first school for the deaf in the USA. But before that happened, we noticed that sign language began to emerge in all of Western Europe. So when Thomas Gallaudet went to Paris and he met Giscard and Efe and Laurent Clerc, he started to notice that signs were developing. So he was fascinated by this. He himself had deaf family, and he was there because he was tutoring a young deaf woman, a young deaf girl whose father sent him there. And really the whole point is that everyone wanted to find the best way to uh, educate deaf people, and some of those people being deaf themselves, so that the future of the community would, exist and really flourish at that time because it was in its infancy. So what happened in Spain, in France, had a major impact on Spain and Amsterdam and other countries in Western Europe. Um, so as I said before, are you still there, Jeffrey? Jeffrey? Oh, there he is. There you are. Okay. Are you still there?
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I think we got cut off. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. That's okay. I think I was trying to go off track anyway.
No, that's okay. I don't. Okay, so your camera is not quite working for me right now, and I'm trying to understand why. Okay, maybe it's coming back now. Hold on one second. No, this is. It should be coming back. I think we have a very weak connection. Maybe it's on both our ends, but if we can't get the video back, then we might have to reschedule this. Oh, here we go. We're back. It's good.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah. So in other words, it was an innovation, a kind of entrepreneurial venture that emerged out of a need. It began in Europe and migrated to the U.S.
Yes. Yes, very much so. There was a need at that time. When Thomas Gallaudet went to England, he noticed that there was no standard language formulated for children who were deaf, and people were struggling to communicate in sign language. So he himself took it as his duty to, since he was tutoring a deaf girl, to collaborate with the deaf scholars at the time to bring sign language to America in hopes that they could set up a school, and that school could serve as the starting point for many other schools, so that deaf students from that point on would be able to communicate in sign language, and sign language would flourish. And I have to also add that the sign language didn't only come from the school, and it definitely did not come from the man. The sign language didn't even come from Laurent Clerc. It was a collaboration of many people. As a matter of fact, there were deaf people in America using sign language before Thomas Gallaudet went and came back. There were people all along pockets of the Northeast, in Martha's Vineyard and Massachusetts and New Hampshire, using sign language. It was a different sign language, but it was sign language nonetheless. These children and their families um, had a genetic gene of deafness, and because of that, they were able to communicate with great ease. Eventually, they joined the other students in the first school for the deaf in Connecticut, and then the second school for the deaf. There was a school for the deaf in Pennsylvania, and then a school for the deaf in New York. These signs integrated with the dorm signs, which integrated with the French Sign Language, which even combined with home signs, which students who had parents who did not sign at all, they created signs just to communicate with their hearing families. That in itself created what was the birth of sign language, which we now call American Sign Language.
And today, can deaf people all over the world communicate through sign language, or is it something different?
That's such a common question. Most people will say, no, they can't communicate, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say sign language is not universal, for sure, although at this time we still share over 50% of our language with the French, sign language, not the English, the French. But and I know that I have a feeling that Matt will back me up on this. If you place a visual manual communicator anywhere with another visual manual communicator, they will find a way to communicate. It won't be in their native language, though, but they will be able to communicate.
Well, you can imagine that, as a hearing person, I find all of this rather remarkable and mysterious and beautiful in many ways, and that it took so long to emerge and emerge spontaneously like this through philanthropy, and also through just dedication. It's a real tribute, I'd say, to human creativity.
It is, and I want to also add that it's a constant effort um, that that goes on because sign language is a language that is recognized as a foreign language now, and students who are hearing are learning it in schools. However, deaf individuals in America are constantly fighting for civil and human rights because on one end we have the beauty of sign language, and then on the other end we have a lot of powers that are trying to eliminate sign language by means of encouraging deaf people medically, genetically, and technologically to find other methods of communicating. And this is not something new. This has been going on since the 19th century. Shortly after the schools were founded, there was conference after conference, committee after committee, local government mandating different proposals to force, to force deaf educators out of schools and to put a tremendous amount of pressure on deaf people to be what is called oral. And oral means exactly what it sounds. It means forcing deaf people to use only speech and lip reading. And most importantly, it's the direct opposition of sign language. In most cases, when someone is an oral person, it is safe to say that their preferred method of communication is not sign language, which is a problem for many people who are supporters of deaf culture. And it was then, and it still is now. Because
Now,
deaf people feel that they don't need to be fixed, that their language and their way of life is perfectly fine the way it is.
um, do you distinguish between efforts to force deaf people to not use sign language and technological means to improve hearing?
Yeah. Um, like I said, this is not something new, but in the 21st century, it has become. I mean, it is the norm now. Um, Parents are counseled automatically after having a child who is deaf, and they are given grief therapy. Um, they are sent to speech therapists to talk about their child who could not possibly even speak yet. Doctors tell them about the horrors that could happen if their child starts to sign or if they sign to their child. Um, it it's a really unequal amount of information that is given out there. I mean, it's not to say that some doctors don't tell parents about the beauty of sign language. And not only the beauty, the fact that sign language is the natural um, way for a deaf person to communicate. It is their right and it is their natural mode of visual communication. They cannot hear, so naturally they are inclined to communicate visually. If you take that away, you are changing what is natural.
Amazing. Are there dictionaries of sign language? Forgive my ignorance.
Yeah, no, it's great. I welcome those questions. There are dictionaries of sign language. You blacked out. There are dictionaries of sign language. Um, Now, in the 60s, I believe it was the 60s now, a, a dictionary was published by William Stokely, and that was the first American Sign Language dictionary that was concentrating on the manual signs instead of listing signs according to word. So it was sign-centric instead of phonocentric. From that point on, sign language dictionaries or American Sign Language dictionaries became very popular. Now you can buy them at Barnes and Noble. It was a topic of controversy actually at the time because he's a hearing person who kind of made a code to come up with these. He didn't come up with the signs, but he did come up with a way of categorizing the signs, and it was a topic of controversy. But it became something that really the deaf community found very helpful to classify their signs, even though they had them before him.
Can I ask you, Mandy, how you got interested in sign language? How you became an expert in sign
Sure. I mean, people get interested in many ways now. I was lucky because I grew up next to my uncle who's passed away now, but he was deaf and he was a wonderful man, and he was much older than me. So he grew up in a generation where sign language was not quite what it was today. It wasn't even classified as American Sign Language yet, because remember that happened in the 60s. It was just sign language. Deaf culture was not even coined yet. It was just deaf communities. And I grew up living next door to him, and so I copied his signs. And he's no longer with us today, but I try my best to still keep him with me. And I have a lot of deaf friends, and I work as an interpreter, and I'm also a teacher. I'm not currently teaching right now, but I love what I do, and thank you for asking.
you have you have a love of human liberty too. It's very important. I met you at a kind of gathering of people dedicated to human liberty and human rights in New Hampshire. What is the connection to you between liberty, human rights, and deaf culture and sign language.
Okay. I'm gonna answer, and then I'm gonna have Matt back me up on this too. I think with any culture to strive, it's very important for independence. I think that when I did this research, and now I have a lot of background in since I'm a teacher and since I went through an interpreting program, this is not new information for me, but I did a lot of research for this presentation, and I realized that all throughout history, to get to this point, and I wrote it down here, deaf people networked together. So they networked through the middle of the 20th century. Deaf people built a strong network of associations throughout the broader deaf community. Most of the affiliations and publications are still in existence today. Many others have changed their names. Some of these associations include the largest network to defend the rights of deaf people thus far, which is the NAD, the National Federation for the Deaf, the World Federation for the Deaf, what was the Deaf Mutes Journal, um, the National Theater for the Deaf, the National Association for the Deaf for Youths, Silent News, which is a newsletter, and more currently we have Deaf Nation, and then the Registry for Interpreters for the Deaf has certified deaf interpreters, which work with other deaf people. And I also have to add, I just realized it's so important that I talk about this. There have been several times in history that deaf people have had actual revolutions for their rights. And I have to talk about them really, at least briefly, to fight for their human rights. I have to talk about Deaf President Now really quickly, in case you don't know. Deaf President Now happened in Gallaudet University. Have you heard of Gallaudet University?
I have.
Okay. So in the middle of, by the 20th century, there had been many schools already set up, but there had not been a college yet. So Thomas Gallaudet, his son, established a college for the deaf. So I'm going to fast forward for time to 1988. Although there's a college for the deaf, it has always had administration of hearing people controlling it, not ever a person who is deaf in power. So at the next election, they had handed it to a deaf and hearing, and the board picked a hearing person. And the deaf students all just flipped out, which was great. And they organized a huge protest and demanded that their needs were met. They had several demands, and one of them was that they have the person who is president force them to step down and replace them with a deaf president. And the other demand was that they increase the number of deaf administrators, and that the protesters would not be penalized. And they said the board did not accept their demands right away. So the deaf community rallied, the greater deaf community, the greater signing community. When that didn't work, they contacted the local offices, they contacted the news, they contacted the radio, and it went what we would call now viral. And it was on the news, and it got the attention of the greater American public, and they were forced to retreat. And there was the first deaf president appointed, which was Dr. I. King Jordan. It was unprecedented, and it was a monumental movement for the deaf community in America, and it was called Deaf President Now, and that was the first one. And then there was another one more recently, since I'm an interpreter, in 2006, where although the person they picked was deaf, the community felt that the person that was deaf, since they were an oral deaf person, and we are in what deaf people would feel is a crisis for the plight of autism. They were not happy with who was appointed for them, so they protested yet again. And it was a peaceful protest, but the media viewed it as an aggressive protest. Over time, and they said, she's deaf, you should accept her. They said, no, we want someone who's going to be sensitive to our needs as a signing community. And over time, they were able to get her to step down. And actually, she was forced to step down. And then, a little technical difficulty. And now there is a president, a school president for Gallaudet University, who is culturally deaf, and his name is Dr. Hurwitz. And these are just two times. If we had more time, I would talk about how deaf individuals petition to have their own state twice. There have been times when they've seek their own legal counsel for land ownership and grow their own businesses. And there's just been countless times where this subculture has become unified. It's just been wonderful. So I feel that if that answers your question, I feel that that would be why. And I want to bring Matt on too, because he's deaf and I'm hearing, and here I am talking about a culture that I'm not fully part of. So.
Hello, my name is Matt. I can't see. I could just look at him. So I want to talk about deaf culture. And
can you hear her?
Two separate issues. Deaf people, they tend to depend on the government for money, and if they don't have a job, so they receive SSI. And I also want to talk about Social Security disability insurance.
People who work more than 5 years, they're able to collect Medicare.
I also, it's weird for me to hear and watch him sign.
I want to talk about people who receive SSI and people who receive SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. People who receive a monthly income from the government. So these are my feelings about that. I feel like deaf people should focus on earning their own income and need to educate themselves like they did before. How can they do this? Attending deaf clubs, as we did before. So we have so much technology now, iPhones, video phones, so much access. You know what I mean?
Well, that's a very moving tribute. That's a very profound comment. What kind of barriers stand in the way of deaf people becoming financially and economically independent?
Well, because most schools, they're not teaching their students to prepare for the future. They're focusing on education, and then
it's okay. Also, there's a lot of a tendency for us to rely on the government instead of relying on ourselves. Deaf people and other people tend to stay home. and they feel that we don't have enough money. Also, where's the health insurance? We need to learn how to be more independent, and take care of our own financial needs.
You recalled a past when this was true. Uh, uh, this 19th century, deaf people never could depend on the government, right? They had to make their own way.
Yeah. Now I'm speaking for myself. Um, Certainly, I think so, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, but in my uncle's time, he didn't collect any government assistance. Um, Now this goes for just people in general. Um, they there was no technology, but even if there were, um, deaf people and people in general, immigrants, non-immigrants, networked together to get things done. There were less laws. I didn't get a chance to talk about the laws that there are to protect certain rights and access to communication, but there were none then, and there was still an ongoing effort and struggle for equal communication. And deaf people, although they didn't have on-call interpreters and video interpreters and texting devices, naturally, because technology had not, launched yet, they still had communication. It wasn't as seamless as it is now, but they still owned property, had businesses, open schools, and Matt was talking about this before. Maybe he could touch on it again about representation and advocacy. They still have deaf advocacy. Also, I wanted to add that deaf people, how can I say, reliability. And I was thinking about another word. How can I state it? Maybe if I explain it better. I was just thinking about something. Thinking about advocacy, had a few notes. Representation. If a deaf person would need help now, today, we are able to take advantage of technology, and we are able to socialize amongst each other and use the community as a way to move forward.
Well, certainly, if deaf people had to depend on the government, there would probably never be such a thing as sign language.
Yeah, I would agree. And another thing that I had written, and I'll say it now, is pretty much since sign language became, saying it just popped in my head. One moment. Since sign language became something that was used every day, hearing people have tried to stop it, and certainly on a level of power. People are just not comfortable with that. There's been throughout history, deaf people have been victims of eugenics, victims of oppression, have many of their rights and just they've had to fight for their rights over time. And many times it's been because of the government. And as Matt said before, most of these schools, they get their grants, and the medical field that promotes the technology for cochlear implants and genetic modification. They get grants from the government. So there is a connection here. It's not just individuals saying, oh, okay, no deaf people. It's not that way. There is a connection here.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. Should we
Yeah.
let him continue? Matthew, do you continue?
Yeah, he was saying, I just reminded me, business networking. For example, if a person who couldn't afford a lawyer, they could call a law firm, and maybe that law firm would give them a discount if they were able to network under that law firm. You know, if the person couldn't afford a lawyer, they were in that social network. If that network was deaf, you know, if that deaf network could advertise to other deaf people would be willing to use that lawyer as their lawyer. You know, some lawyers are expensive, so if deaf people network with other deaf people, they would be able to get things done.
Yes. Well, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Well, this is such a brilliant and big topic, Mandy. I think we should call it a day. I appreciate
Okay.
so much the introduction to this world. To me,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
represents a beautiful example of how society can come together and create things for themselves and flourish. And I'm so moved by it, and I'm so glad we've had this conversation. And
I
I
just
must,
have a little blurb of a conclusion. Can I
yeah,
just?
no, go ahead.
Okay. And it says, in conclusion, I would like to stress that sign language and deaf culture is, as um, Carol Padden, Padden, states in her book, which is called Inside Deaf Culture, in case you want to read it, is collective acts and thoughts which have happened over generations. Sign language did not occur as a result of any central authority, and there is no single person, deaf or hearing, responsible for creating the language. There is no school that is solely responsible for the language that all deaf Americans use today. The language is rooted in its past, but also changes with the passing of time. And most importantly, sign language exists because deaf people use it. And that's what I'd like to end.
That's
Thank you, thank
enormously.
you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And this is applause. Matt's applauding. And this is how you say thank you in sign language. And thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much to everyone. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye.